In this video lecture, we will walk through how to work with arrays in Visual Logic. The goal of this lecture is to keep to the most basic operations related to arrays. We'll look at how to create an array, how to add something to a specific index, how to print something out of a given index, and then we'll also look at how we can use a for loop to iterate through all of the indexes of a given array. So let's get started. In Visual Logic, to add an array to our program, we're going to go ahead and we are going to right-click on the down arrow, and we're going to choose the Make Array block from the pop-up menu. And you'll note that this inserts the intrinsic function that knows how to create an array in our programming environment. And so we need to give our array two things. We need to give it a name, and in this case, I'll call it states. And I'm not going to type in all 50 states, so we'll stick to my tri-state area, and we'll set the upper bound to 3. And what this will do is this will create a list with the name of states, and it will have an upper bound of 3. One of the things that we haven't discussed too much in Visual Logic is using the debugging tools. So if I click the Step Into button in the upper left-hand corner here, one of the things you'll note is that my program will bring up this window called Variable Watch. And this will allow me to see my array, or like see under the scene of what's happening in my program. So if I run this, you'll note that nothing really exciting happens because there's really not much for my program to do. So as we start to add things to our array and do things with it, we'll be able to see the state of our list right here as we build it. So let's start to do some stuff with this specific list. I'm going to use an assignment here, and we'll talk a little bit about how to add an item to a given index of an array. So on the left-hand side, I need to give the name of my list, the name of my array, which is states, and the index in which I want to save something. And I'm going to save at index 0. I'm going to save New Jersey. And the string New Jersey has double quotes around it, and what this says is take this string on the right, insert it into my array named states at index 0. I'll hit OK. So now we can go ahead, and if I click on the Step Into button, what you're going to note is it shows me that I have an array named states. There's nothing in it. But if I step one more time, which is like running very slowly, what you're going to note is on the next line of my program, you'll note that I can see that at the first location in my array, index 0, I have the state New Jersey. You'll note that index 1, index 2, and index 3 are unoccupied. And by default, Visual Logic puts a 0 in those locations. Note that my upper bound is 3. That means my array can hold 4 things. So I actually made a small error, right? Because the first index is 0, the second is 1, the third is 2, and the fourth is 3. If I only want to save 3 states, I really need to go back here and make my upper bound 2. So let's make that correction. And so now if I want to add something, an index at another index, let's say for example at states index 1. So let's say we want to add Pennsylvania there. Hit OK. And now I'll come back up here, and instead of hitting run, because I want to see the menu that shows me the value of my list without having to print it out, you'll note that after the first item is added to the list, New Jersey is at item 0. And now I'm about to run what's happening down here, this red highlighted section. If I step again, you'll note that Pennsylvania is added to index 1. So index 0 is New Jersey, index 1 is Pennsylvania. Let's go ahead and finish this out, and we'll add Delaware here. Notice again that I always have to give the name of my list and the index at which I want to save something. And now I have the ability, if I step into my program, you can watch as New Jersey is saved at index 1, Pennsylvania at index 1, and Delaware at index 2. So index 0, index 1, index 2. And that means I have 3 items. The length of my array is 3, and I have items at those 3 given indexes. So this is how you put things into a given index of the list. How would we output these? let's just make a simple output statement and say the state at index 1 is. And so just like when we use an assignment operator, what we want to do is give the name of the list, the index at which we want to access the thing we're interested in. So go to the array named states and go to index 1 and print that out. And now if we look at this, we won't need to use the debugger anymore. We'll just run this straight up. And you'll note that the output at the bottom is the state at index 1 is Pennsylvania. Why? Because that's what I saved here. One of the things we talked about was an out of bounds error. What happens if I use an index that doesn't exist? So what happens if I try to access the item at index 7? Since my list only has 3 slots, indexes 0, 1, and 2. Well, if I print that out and run my program, notice that I get an error that says 7 is outside of array states bounds 2. So it's basically saying that I can't access that. And then I get the big red error. So that's how we can print an individual item. Now, because we have the ability to, because all of the indices of an array basically are represented by positive integers, we can actually utilize these items with a for loop. So let's take a minute to see how this works. And so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to set up a variable. I'm going to call it I, which tends to be the traditional name of a loop iterator variable. I'm going to start at 0 because I know that the first index of an array is always 0. And then I'm going to print to my upper bounds, which is 2. And I'm going to step from 0 to 2 one at a time. So I want to go 0, 1, and 2. And then what I'll do is drag this output into my print statement. And actually, we can see this all pretty well in the window, so I'm not going to zoom out. And so what will happen here is I'm going to change this. Instead of it being states 7, I'm going to change it to states I. Because the first time through the loop, I will be 0. The second time through the loop, I will be 1. And the third time through the loop, I will be 2. And let's go ahead and run this. And actually, you know what? Before we do that, let's change this to console output so it all goes into one window. And let's run it. Oops. And one of the things I forgot to do was put my new line character onto another line. So let's do that again and run it. And so what you'll note here is that after running through the loop, oops, and I actually said this state at index 1. I still have a bug in here. So let's fix that bug too. And it's alright that you can see me having bugs in my code because it's pretty normal to have bugs in your code. And I think sometimes fixing bugs in a video lecture is a good way to kind of demonstrate common errors that can be made when working with any type of programming construct, but in this case arrays. So what I'm going to do is print the state at index I is states I. So this will be combined so that we get the proper index. And again, just me not being very good at keeping track of my typos, but what we want to do is see how that works. So I'll make some adjustments here, and now let's run this again. And so what happens after we run this loop is we can see that the state at index 0 is New Jersey. Well, that's correct because I saved New Jersey at index 0. Notice that the first time through the loop, I is 0. So it says print the value of I, 0. And then it says go to the list name states and go to index 0 and grab the item that's stored there. And then it comes back up here, I is incremented by 1 to 1. Prints out the state at index 1 is Pennsylvania because I is 1 and the item stored at index 1 of my states array is Pennsylvania. And then finally it'll go to 2 and it'll print out the state at index 2 is Delaware. So it's pretty common that when you create arrays, you're going to be creating them and using them with loops because we want to be able to process all of the items in our array. And so this is a pretty simplified lecture just to kind of demonstrate how these things work. The reason why this is a simplified lecture is that using arrays, there's so many different aspects to using arrays to solve things like searching and sorting algorithms. There's pretty complex ways of using them for all types of solving all types of computational problems. That what we really want to do is focus on these very core components. Saving something at a given index of the array, reading something from a given index of an array, and using a for loop to iterate through these items. And as we work on the homework assignments, what you'll find is that we'll look at different and unique ways to apply or to solve problems using arrays.